one of the things that I do, one of my hats, is that I teach permaculture. And we have an ongoing discussion. Is permaculture a part of regenerative agriculture, or is regenerative agriculture a part of permaculture? It's a high chicken, meat egg. The thing to remember about this is that both of these focus on systems thinking to solve problems. And that's a real key component. So I'm going to see what works best for making the slide go forward. Or maybe nothing does. There we go. So right now I want to ban the word sustainable. We're not going to talk about sustainable because we really don't want to sustain what we have now. That would be a really bad idea. And let me see if I can get this little, oh, now it's not going to do it. There we go.
The word sustainability is one of my least favorite words in the English language. I think it's so limiting. You know, if I said to you, what's your relationship like with your partner? And you said to me, oh, it's sustainable. I'd say, shame, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah. Or it would sound like, gosh, you're just hanging in there. And I think nature is so much more vibrant than that. You know, it's attuned, it's responsive, it's resilient. And I think critically important, it's regenerative. So I would say, if anything, that's what we should be striving for, is regenerative living.
So that's what we want to strive for, is regenerative. I'm showing you these pictures today. These things are called specialty crops. We also know them as food. These are the things that we eat. And yet, when we're talking about agriculture, they're considered specialties. In many cases, they're not counted among the kinds of crops that are eligible for certain programs, or for crop insurance, which we may talk about a little bit later, that covers the farmers if there's a disaster. We won't talk about them today because they only count for about 15.6 million acres of farmland in the United States, while commodity crops, which we're going to talk about next, cover about 185 million, or almost 186 million acres. So you can see that the commodities are are planted in far more places than the specialty crops. So who knows what this is? What's growing in this field? Somebody can unmute themselves and answer, you know.
Wheat or barley?
It's wheat. It's wheat. So we started farming in this way about 100 years ago. Two German chemists, Haber and Bosch, figured a way to create synthetic fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer. And because of that, it became widely available. And this is what really inspired today's large commercial agriculture. There are 4 main crops that are part of this. I am not sure why I've got all these little strings on my pictures, but maybe that's just me. This is corn. This is what happens to corn a lot of times in the western part of Kansas, where there's usually drought. This is soybeans. So if you've ever taken a drive through, say, Illinois in the middle of summer, you will see corn and soybeans and corn and soybeans and corn and soybeans. If you go further south, you might see cotton. So these four crops, wheat, corn, soybeans, and cotton, are where most of our food-like substances that are derived from. Notice I don't say food. I think I'm pulling from Michael Pollan's work. They're food-like substances. And of course, cotton gives us fiber for clothing. But these are the crops that are on most of the land, and the way they're farmed today are hugely destructive of the soil. Occasionally, farmers will rotate some other things in. The top picture is oats. The middle picture is something that in Kansas we call milo, but it's grain sorghum. And the bottom is alfalfa, which is generally fed to livestock. Some farmers do rotate their crops from time to time, not usually, usually in some sort of fixed pattern. But the interesting thing is that the fields that they have are growing plants about 7 months out of the year. And so about 5 months out of the year, there's nothing growing on them. And the fields begin to look like this. In some cases, they burn off the stubble. And I mentioned in a group this morning that in Kansas, we tend to burn off the grass from last year this time of year so that the new grass emerges, but nothing emerges out of burning the corn stubble that you see there. Sometimes the stubble is just left, and sometimes it's rolled down so that it actually goes back into the ground. That's actually not a bad practice. But for 5 months of the year, it's basically left with rather bare soil. The wheat field shows more stuff in the middle than really usually is. Plowing and disking have been the most common things to use, and farmers used to, and some still think that working the soil makes it better. The more you work it, the better it gets. And it really just makes the soil deader. This is the advice that Farm Bureau and most of the land-grant universities that teach agriculture give to farmers these days. Why do you think it is that they tell farmers that this is the way to go?
Because all the research money at land grant institutions come from chemical companies, and it's self-sustaining that way for them.
That's a big part of it, and it's one of those follow the money things. So if you're using no-till, obviously you don't have to buy a tiller. If you're not going to go over the ground 3 and 4 times a year, you're going to sell less diesel. So they really like to be able to keep the farmers spending their money on machinery and inputs. So spraying fertilizer or herbicide on crops multiple times in a growing season is very costly to the farmers and to the land. There's the compaction of these large machines, and these things are just immense. If you ever have a chance to see them going down the road, you'll just be surprised. They look to me, the sprayers always look to me like giant insects with these wings that come out. About 2 weeks ago, I had to face one down in the field south of me because he was drifting 2,4-D onto my freshly planted crop that I had out there. I was not happy with him because it was windy. These things are very lucrative to the ag companies, but they cause lots of problems, and drift is just one of them. So before we get into the good stuff, I want to give a shout out to a couple of people. Some of the I want to make you aware of some of the pioneers, or in my feeling, rock stars of regenerative ag. And Vandana Shiva has been kind of at the forefront of it internationally. Most of you probably know her. She's been everywhere, and she really has made people aware of the impact of soil health, especially in third world countries. And I really appreciate how outspoken she's been. Another one who you may not be aware of is Ratan Lal. He is a professor at Ohio State University, and he has worked out some ways in which putting carbon back into the soil could actually offset a great deal of the carbon that's out in the atmosphere. Now, there's still lots of discussion on this. Some people think that it will work. Some people think that it will only work seasonally. And of course, if you're tilling, it will only work seasonally. Ratan Lal won something called the Japan Award, which is basically the Asian Nobel Prize. And he's been working for about 50 years on this issue of soil health. He comes from the northern part of India, I believe. And he's now working on the climate change project. If anyone's interested in his work, I have a little slideshow that I do called The Case for Permaculture, where I take all the problems that he's identified and show how he can fix them with a good case of regenerative agriculture. And then Ray Archuleta, who is probably best known in the Midwest, but he has been out there in the trenches teaching farmers how to use the techniques of cover crops, of no-till, and all that. And he has a really wonderful ability to break it down into ways that they understand. And he shifted the minds of many Midwest farmers to better soil management. And I love his quote, "Nature does not till," which begs the question, why do we?
Could you just say his name again, please?
His name is Ray Archuleta. And he's with the National Resources Conservation Service. NRCS is a federal program that is part of the farmer education. They also help people put farmland into conservation reserve and all that. There's a whole bunch of different programs that they have. And finally, Wes Jackson. He's my next town over neighbor. Wes founded the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas in 1976, and he's had waves of scientists coming through. They work for a while. Lots of people like to do their postdocs there, I think. And they've been working to breed perennial crops that can be harvested annually for food. And their gold standard is to create a 4-species perennial polyculture that will give both cereal crops and an oil crop to make a rather complete diet for human beings. They have perennialized a form of rice that will bring in 6 harvests in 3 years. And it only has to be replanted every 3 years, which is apparently I don't know a lot about rice because we don't farm that here in Kansas, but apparently that's something that was really a kind of a major gain there. They're working on perennializing grain sorghum, and they're working on that in Uganda, and they've got a group of scientists there that are and they're very close to having that perennialized. And then one of their kind of main thing that they've been working on for the longest time is a perennial wheat that they call Kernza. It's a cross between perennial wheatgrass and a domesticated wheat. They, about 4 years ago, got the seed heads to be at marketable size. So if you live in Minnesota or Oregon, I think it is, you can buy beer made from Kernza. We get, there's great competition to get bags of it here at the Land Institute when they have their annual Prairie Fest.
How do you spell it?
Kernza. It is kind of a cross between Kanza, which is the Indian nation that was here in Kansas, and the kernels of wheat. So, and they actually have 2 varieties of it now, but that they're working on. And they actually got Cascadian Farms to want some of it, but they don't have enough production of it yet. So it's coming. But
Isn't Cascadian Farms owned by General Food or
General Mills? Yes,
Yeah.
it is owned by General Mills.
Okay.
But so that's a major thing for a crop like this that would puts down. I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures, but the root structure of these perennial wheatgrasses are 10, 15 feet deep, and they're roots all the time in the soil, and so for that to be able to be used for commercial food production would be a major thing. It would be, because if they're going to create this grain and nobody's going to eat it, then that's sort of a why bother. But if they can get it into the mainstream, then it will definitely be something that people will go for. Well, farmers will want to plant it, people will want to grow it, people will want to eat it. Are there questions? I saw the chat flash and that there were 7 things out there. Okay.
Which is a comment from Ruth, where she's Darlington, who says the Land Institute now has a separate website just about Kernza.
Yes.
I found a baker in Pennsylvania who uses it in their baked goods. That was from,
wow.
Yeah.
They've done test plots in a lot of places. It doesn't seem to, it grows well in like Minnesota and Wisconsin, doesn't seem to grow very well in New York. And so as those of you who've read Braiding Sweetgrass know, that plants frequently know their origin. And I think the perennial wheatgrass is a Midwest plant, and so it probably doesn't necessarily want to grow in other places. So
is the main advantage that it can be used as a cover crop? Is that the whole idea? Or I'm not sure.
No, the whole reason behind it is that it's perennial, so you can harvest the wheat year after year after year. I don't know how many times at this point. They're keeping track of that.
So you can just kind of build your prairie and harvest your grain.
Exactly. And they're working on this 4 species mix that would allow you to harvest several cereal crops and an oil crop from the same stand, because they're interplanted, and actually they kind of do them more in strips. So the wheat is growing and the silphium is growing next to it. So but it's really exciting to watch this research. And the interesting thing about this is that they have done it all the old-fashioned Gregor Mendel way, where without splicing genes and inserting fish chromosomes and all that. So they're not, it's not genetic, it's genetically modified, but it's genetically modified the way nature genetically modifies things, which is each time they have a crop, they bring the plants that have the best size kernels together and pollinate them. They do an awful lot of hand pollination on some of these things so that they can cross them, and that's significant. The other thing that they just got a piece of equipment, and I'm not a scientist, so I can't tell you what it is, but they're able to, as when they have the plants in the nursery, they're able to look at the, I would imagine that they're looking at the DNA, the chromosomes, and looking at the plants that have the ones that are similar to the plants that are producing the best, so they can tell before they even put them out onto the prairie whether the plants are going to produce the large size seeds or not. So I think that's, I mean, it's just, to me, one of the most exciting parts of all of this. And it's nice to live close enough to pay attention to it from time to time. If Paul Crum, I don't think Paul Crum is coming to this event, but if he were here, he could tell you even more about it because he's worked with them quite a bit. He's the other QEW person from out here. This is a quote that someone attributed to Gabe Brown, but it was really his mentor, Don Campbell, who's a holistic management educator from Saskatchewan, who coined this quote. And this is really important because I think that changing the way we see things, and we have an opportunity for this right now, but changing the way we see things is really important for us to figure out how to make the changes that we need. And that's part of it. So I'm going to ask you to do this little exercise right now. So bear with me. So make a circle with your fingers. Make a circle with your fingers. And put it up to your eye. And if you put it up to your eye, you can see your entire computer screen, right? Now, keep looking through that hole and move your hand closer and closer and closer to the computer screen. And what do you see? Your perspective gets much smaller, doesn't it? So I think we've been looking at all of our problems like this, with that perspective being a ways away from us, and we need the broader picture. So we need to look at it. So change your focus so that you can change the way you make changes, major changes. This is another one. What do you see? How many of you see a rabbit?
Duck bunny.
Duck.
How many of you see a duck?
Duck.
Duck and rabbit.
Duck bunny.
Both.
Both.
Both, right. So it's a matter of perspective. It's whether it's how you look at it, whether you look at one as the front of the face or the other as the front of the face. So changing that, how we deal with issues requires us to see with perspectives that allow change. We need to be able to do that. So here is a regenerative farmer outstanding in his field, and this is Gabe Brown. And I'm going to tell you his story a little bit because he's one who's he's been very vocal and outspoken and works really hard to tell other people about regenerative farming and how he has done this. So Gabe Brown is one of dozens of farmers that have been at this for a while. He farms 5,400 acres in North Dakota. So if you've ever been to the Dakotas, to North Dakota, it's big. It's spread out. Shelley can tell you, Shelley and Judy can tell you how big and spread out it is. His farm gets an average rainfall of 16 inches of rain per year and about more than 100 inches of snow. So that 100 inches of snow works out to be something about 10 inches of rain. So it's a pretty dry area. And Gabe is standing there in one of his cover crop fields. So Gabe began farming with his father-in-law in the 1980s. And his father-in-law used all the standard farming techniques that were really big at the time. They did have a big operation. They had some cattle. In fact, they had a line of prize-winning bulls that actually sustained them for a while because this happened. So Gabe took over the operation in the early 90s, and the first 4 years that he had the operation on his own were disasters. 2 years in a row, his entire crop was hailed out, and this is what a corn crop looks like when hail has come through. And this happens in the Midwest a lot. We get wonderful weather, the crops come in great, and then a few days before harvest, you get a thunderstorm that has big hail in it. And it's not unusual out here for us to have golf ball size hail or bigger, and everything's gone in an hour. This happened 2 years in a row. And he didn't buy the hail insurance, so his crops were total losses. Year 3, he had a drought. And I can't remember what happened in year 4, but after the 4th year, it got to the point where his banker wasn't going to give him any more money, and they figured that every solution that they had to be low cost or no cost. So somewhere before the 4th year of the disaster, he had decided to try no-till because he just couldn't afford the diesel to run the tractor more than once. So he bought this. This is a seed drill. The little thing that says Purple Wave at the bottom there, that's our local auction house where you go to get farm equipment if you need farm equipment. And a seed drill is a device. You put the seed in it, and it pushes it into the ground at the right depth and covers it over a little bit so that the seeds are distributed evenly and at the proper seeding rate and depth. And so the seeds are covered by soil so the birds don't get them, and they're not dried up with the sun, and it makes really pretty rows. Okay. So he began no-till, and then he realized that some of his ground needed something more. So after he got a harvest of corn, he began to plant some cover crops on his field right after the harvest. And at first he used a 2-species cover crop combination, and he used Sudan grass and grain sorghum, which is the funny stuff that looks like, they also call it broom corn, which is very popular here in the Midwest. We call it Milo. So we planted those, but every year when he planted the cover crops, he would experiment with something a little bit different. He began experimenting with more kinds of seeds and different combinations, and he would see how they did for the year and perhaps try them 2 years in a row. If they didn't work very well after the 2nd year, he would drop them. And he says it's important not to be afraid to fail. And he's done it several times spectacularly. So things don't always work. And one of the things that is true about anywhere that you farm is that not everything that works on one place will work on the other. You have to be really attentive to what does well on your place. Let's see. Oh, I went the wrong direction. There we go.
Carol,
Yes?
those seed drills are run on fuel though, right?
And you pull them with a tractor, yeah. So you have to, but you have to get the seed to the ground in some fashion. So the old-fashioned way was to broadcast it it throws the seed on top of the ground. I don't have a seed drill, so I broadcast when I plant cover crop. And then I try to do it right before a rain, so the rain kind of soaks it in. And I pray that the birds don't get it, which means I have to chase my own chickens out of the field, because they're all about, when they know I'm out there seeding, so they're all about following me out there. And so drills are actually pretty good, and they do get the stuff in rows. It's really interesting that human beings really like those linear patterns, and some, when you plant a polyculture cover crop that looks kind of wild, everybody thinks that you just have a weed patch. In fact, several years ago, before I got my place here and I was gardening in the community garden, I put in a 7 variety mixture of cover crop on a newly established garden, because it had been it was a brownfield site, and I wanted to try and add some, I wanted to uptake some of the stuff that was in the ground, and I also wanted to put some roots in the ground that might actually do some good for the organic matter. And I got fined by the community garden because I had a weed patch, and I planted hairy vetch, and when they saw the leaves, they thought I had planted crown vetch, which is a noxious weed, but hairy vetch is a very good crop. So it took a lot of explaining to retired ag professors that what I was doing was cover cropping and not growing a weed patch. But it takes time to get them all on board. So Gabe Brown does these, there are 2 different versions of these principles. One is 5 and one is 6. And the 6th one is to observe. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But these are his 5 soil health principles, because soil health is what farming really should be all about. Okay, and he finally articulated this after about a decade of working on some of this. In the beginning, the farmers that did regenerative agriculture back in the 90s, they were exceedingly rare, and they kind of had to find each other at some of the ag conferences. It was sort of like the secret handshake, because the other farmers didn't think that they knew what they were talking about, or that they didn't know what they were doing, and you couldn't say cover crop back then. And it's only within maybe the last 6-7 years that I've seen it really come on big. Farm Bureau still doesn't want to talk about it, but they had, they would go to these conferences where they were being sold the bad info about how they had to keep tilling, because you have to keep those weeds out of there, and you have to use these costly fertilizers and the herbicides, and in some cases types of inoculants that the crop wouldn't germinate without. But they did find each other, and they supported each other, and they encouraged each other, and they learned from each other's mistakes and helped each other along. And this past January, and I think it was like also the first week of February, we had 2 events in Kansas. One was something called No Till on the Plains. And I think somebody from here, somebody who's on the call may have actually been there. I was not at this one. And the other one, that No Till on the Plains, was in Wichita, and Soil U, which is Soil University, was in Salina. And all throughout the year, the NRCS folks are out there teaching farmers in all kinds of different places some of the techniques of regenerative agriculture. Kansas also has something called the Kansas Rural Center, and they work really hard at connecting farmers who are interested in regenerative agriculture with the right resources that they need to be able to do this. We also have an arm of the Savory organization that helps with the holistic management and teaches a lot of classes to farmers around the area. But these are the 5 basic principles: minimize soil disturbance, plant diversity, keep living roots in the soil, integrate animals, and armor your soil, have soil armor. So we're going to look at these a little bit more closely. So minimize soil disturbance, and there are 2 kinds of soil disturbance. So mechanical tillage does the opposite of what farmers think it does. Farmers were told that the more you work the soil, the better the soil becomes. Tillage actually destroys soil structure and function. It destroys the soil aggregates, significantly decreases infiltration. And it's been raining pretty hard here today, and I was looking out at the yard where the chickens are, and all the places where they've scratched off the grass, the water was not sinking into the ground, but you could tell that the water that was in the areas that were covered by grass, the water was sinking in just fine. So when it rains, when there's less infiltration, the rain rushes off the fields, and one of the problems that we have in this area is flooding. Tillage also accelerates the breakdown of organic matter. So you want the organic matter in the soil, but it breaks it down really fast because it infuses oxygen in the soil and increases an opportunistic bacteria which consume the carbon-based glues that hold the soil together. And I think somebody yesterday said something about the smell of the soil when it rains. And soil actually has a couple of different smells, and you can tell there's a certain smell that's a little bit sour. That means that opportunistic bacteria is the dominant species in the soil. Tillage releases CO2, it stimulates weed growth and diminishes complex mycorrhizal fungal networks. Fewer nutrients for the plant mean fewer nutrients for the animals and the people that consume them. But a tilled field sure looks pretty, doesn't it? Always looks so nice and clean and neat. Thank you, Kristen. But that's what I remember, hearing that, you had to till a straight row. That's how they could tell if you were a good farmer or not, that your rows were straight, right?
I'm a prairie girl by nature, so I have a hard time with, I'm from Minnesota, so I have a hard time with all the straight lines.
All the straight lines, yeah, it's true. So the other kind of soil disturbance is chemical. And of course, there's 2 kinds here. One is fertilizer and the other is herbicide. But chronic chemical disturbance destroys the whole ecosystem function. And you'd think that adding nitrogen to the soil over the years would increase the amount of nitrogen in the soil, but it actually is the opposite. Over time, the soil nitrogen can decline up to 60% or more from its original fertility. And corn yields now are lower after decades of input. They call this the browning of the Green Revolution. Gabe Brown feels that applying nitrogen causes the plants to get lazy. I love his analogy here, because when nitrogen is applied, the plants don't need to form the beneficial relationships with the soil biology. They just suck up the nitrogen that has been sprayed on them, and they grow from there, but they never develop that relationship that would bring them some of the other things from the field. And then herbicides are just as destructive in killing plant biology as well as the pests, the weeds that they want to prevent. It's important to know a couple of things. One is that enough glyphosate has been sprayed in this country to cover every acre of harvestable land at about 37.5 pounds per acre, which is a lot, which is why it's in everything, including us. And the other thing to note is that glyphosate is also a chelator, so it binds the minerals. So eventually the plants
So what?
It's a chelator.
Oh, chelator, yeah.
It binds the minerals, and so it actually makes the plants mineral deficient, which of course once we eat them makes us mineral deficient. So because we should be getting a wide variety of minerals from the plants that we eat, the vegetables that we eat, but that's not happening. And of course, since so much of what we eat is made up of the soy products that come out of the big commercial fields, that's
Carol, could you just talk a moment about where the nitrogen that runs off, where it winds up?
well, it winds up in our waterways, and so if it's close enough, if you're close enough to a large enough stream where it will go down to a river. So where we are here, it flows into the Kansas River, which flows into the Missouri River, which flows in the Mississippi River, and it creates that dead zone in the Gulf. So that's a big part of it. Locally, it flows into some of the area reservoirs and creates blue-green algae blooms in the summertime, which are so highly toxic that not only can't people swim in them, you can't even let your dog splash in the reservoir because of the blue-green algae to kill them. I believe Senator Imhoff was infected a couple of years ago from swimming in a lake that had a blue-green algae outbreak because he didn't quite catch on to what it was until after he had been in it. So it's a big deal, and farmers now, because it's become so expensive, farmers are applying it a little bit more judiciously. One of the costs that farmers have endured of late is the upgrade in the tractors, which have GPS on them, and they can learn through that which parts of their fields need what and those kinds of things. There's also a program at Kansas State University using drones to help farmers survey their fields. If you're farming 5,400 acres, it's kind of hard to walk around and see everything. So they've been using some different techniques, but they're still applying too much nitrogen fertilizer that doesn't get used by the plants, but causes the plants not to connect with the other biology in the soil.
Carol, I don't know if you want to continue taking questions. Hubert had a question for you. Hubert?
Yeah, I was just wondering on the Gabe Brown statement that the nitrogen, makes the plants lazy. I understand that. I get that. Was he talking about, that's the first question. I have a second one in a moment. But was he talking about perennial crops getting lazy or annual crops that actually won't be around that long?
Well, he's talking about annual crops because on this one, and he does a lot of perennial crops too, but he never applies nitrogen to the perennial crops. He plants a nitrogen fixing crop in with whatever perennials that he's putting on there. So he would be adding a plant that brings nitrogen to the area
Right.
itself. Something like a clover, or I'll get into some of those other things in a little bit. But yeah, and you had another question?
Yeah, well, actually, that just brings to mind, I planted 60 acres of triticale and annual ryegrass late November here in central North Carolina. And it was too late to plant any legumes. I would have without doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And I put ammonium sulfate on this spring, one pass, and it helped we don't use any fungicides or herbicides or insecticides. And it helped the crop that I had planted outcompete the dead nettle and the henbit and a few and the sun spurge, and it really needed it. And I don't plan on using ammonium sulfate too much. Did a little research on it. It doesn't seem too bad. My wife made me do the research for, make sure safety. So I was wondering what kind of a nitrogen is usually being discussed. I figure it's urea, isn't it?
Not necessarily. It would depend on first of all, it depends on where you are. Mm-hmm. as to what kind you're using. I think what Gabe Brown would say is that you could plant those legumes even if they winter killed soon. So if they got into the ground at all and fixed some roots in there, that he would say that that's better than nothing. I know here in Kansas, I can't actually speak to the legumes, but I know that people who are doing the managed grazing are able to keep grasses growing all year round, which, even despite the fact that we will get
Right.
below zero here, we're much colder, I think, than North Carolina, although I'm not sure where you are in North Carolina.
Near Chapel Hill.
So yeah, so you're in a relatively warm area of you're not up in the mountains or anything like that. So but so you might, what he would say is play with that. So next year when you plant your cover crop, and certainly triticale and annual rye are good cover crop like that, but maybe in one area put in the legumes, see how they do. You don't have to
I'll definitely plant legumes this autumn. I mean, we just got a late start, got the land late, but in September when we take off the Sudan grass that I'll be planting in a couple weeks for worm season, we'll absolutely put in legumes without doubt.
Yeah.
Probably black cowpea with the Sudan grass for that matter.
Yeah.
So
cowpea is a great one. Yeah. So he talks about armor on the soil surface, which I just love this analogy. So bare soil is not a healthy soil, and it's a sign of a dysfunctional ecosystem. And one of the things that he learned in his 2 years of hailed out crop was that once the damaged crop was on the ground, it actually protected the soil from the rain, so that it was able to kind of dissipate the energy of the raindrops coming down. So though things were not absorbing as much as they do now, and this particular field, you can see the crop has been harvested, and then the cover crop was planted in between the rows of the crop. But it slows the erosion from the hard rain that comes on, and we do get some hard rains. We have had instances here where we've had 9 inches of rain in a couple of hours, and I will tell you, you feel like you're going to just drown with the frogs then. So also having crop residue and cover crops on, it inhibits weed growth. It keeps the soil temperatures cooler in the summer, which leads to less need for water. It also reduces the evaporation rate and provides all those good soil critters the organic matter that they need to feed. And that's really important. And here's just a little, a crop science advertisement for cover cropping. You build the soil health, you retain the nutrients, you control erosion, and you reduce weeds. Okay. So build diversity. This is an amazing little cover crop blend. Someone did a study on Gabe Brown's farm a couple of years ago and found 140 species of plants. So this cover crop blend has, I believe, if I can identify them all, it has rye, it has oats, it has some millet, I think. It has lentil, I can identify for sure, and cowpea, and I think there are some clover seeds in there, and probably some more things, and sunflower, did I say, and a couple more things probably that I didn't identify. So nowadays, it is recommended to plant these multiple species mixes because you're able to provide nutrients for more kinds of soil biology. So the more diverse your mix, the more types of soil life it feeds. So you need cool season grasses like barley. This is what we'd be planting here this time of year, and some of this stuff I have in. Barley, oats, rye, triticale, and cool season forbs like brassicas, which are usually something like turnip around here, crimson clover, hairy vetch, and in the wintertime you can do a winter pea here as well as farther north. We usually plant these in the fall. If you can't get them in the fall, the earliest in spring that you can work the ground, that you can drill in the ground. And warm season grasses are also needed after the summer solstice. Several varieties of millet, buckwheat, sorghum, milo, and forbs like cowpeas, mung beans. Okra. Okra is a great plant. I don't like to eat okra, but okra produces masses of foliage. And so it's a good plant if you want to put lots of organic matter back in the ground. Sunflower and soy. I planted sunflower, got away from me last year. My vegetable garden is a sunflower haven right now. But it's a challenge to keep a continual supply of soil armor on your soil, especially in warmer climates, because things break down faster. With the earthworms and the soil biology, they circle through it more rapidly. So he chooses in the warmer weather to plant more carbon things like the okra with the big leaves, and fewer legumes if you're trying to do that. So one year, and this is not Gabe Brown. This is somebody from Green Cover Seed, which is where I buy my cover seed from. I guess that's I need to tell you that. This is called a chaos garden. So in this garden, you throw in everything, all your vegetables. He's picked a patty pan squash there. All your vegetables, all your cover crop stuff, everything goes out there in one massive chaotic mess. And you try, as you go out to harvest your vegetables, you try not to step on any of them because you can't see them half the time. So Gabe did try this one year. I don't know if I'm going to try it ever. I know there's a permaculturist in Austria named Sepp Holzer who uses this technique where he puts all of his vegetable seeds in a coffee can and he goes out and broadcasts them. But the whole point of this is to keep mixing up the diversity that you plant out there, the different cover crops, the different things that you try, until you get things that really work well in your land. So every piece of ground is going to be a little bit different because of how, the sun, the water, the nutrient cycle, all of those things. But you want to keep mixing it up till the soil gets what it needs. Gabe Brown also talks about, all farmers do some kind of a rotation of crops, but he thinks having a fixed rotation is counterproductive, because one of the things, and I know that this is true. One of the things that happens if you do a fixed rotation is the pests just wait. You know, they may not have a good year on the years that you don't plant what they find especially delicious, but they'll wait and wait for the year. If you do something every other year, they'll be back the second year. And so if you don't have a fixed rotation of your crops, it keeps the pests guessing. So, and the fourth principle was to keep living roots in the soil. And after harvest, plant something, even if the plants get winter killed, because they'll feed the underground livestock. And a lot of times, you'll see, if you look at this picture pretty closely, you'll see that some of that is still green, which means that some of it is still alive, even though it's under the snow. If you cut the nutrient cycle short by 5 months because you harvest and then you don't plant something, you starve the soil fertility. And so that's one of the reasons so many farmers have come to rely on synthetic fertilizers, is that after 5 months, there's nothing left in the soil. So roots in the soil also hold the mycorrhizal fungi. And that's really important because they're the ones that increasingly get the network going. They're almost like the neural network that sends out the call for different things that the plant needs to regrow. And having living roots in the soil also increases the water holding capacity and increases infiltration. And then number 5 is integrate animals. So I had to, this is another commercial for folks who live about 60 miles from me, and they have a holistic grass-fed, grass-finished beef up there. And I've been buying beef from them for a while because I don't grow my own cows, but they've been doing this for about 25 years. And they are so excited that anybody's talking about regenerative agriculture and holistic management and why it's important. They brought me all kinds of articles last week with my beef order, and tried to send pictures, but they didn't get here because the file was too big. So holistic you want to integrate animals onto the land, and there's a system that a lot of the regenerative farmers are using called holistic management. And it's a systems thinking approach to managing resources. It's a system of decision making and planning that allows people to understand why they're doing things and create the plan and understand how that they can use it to work with nature. It was created by a man named Alan Savory, a biologist from Zimbabwe. And I would say, cue any vegans who want to yell at me right now for talking about Alan Savory. Normally when I say that, I get somebody. So Alan Savory worked for the agricultural department in Zimbabwe, which was then known as Rhodesia, back in the 60s. And they had a real problem with elephants coming in and decimating food crops. And so he figured, well, we'll just, kill off some of the elephants. And they killed a bunch of elephants in the effort to keep the food stock from being completely eaten, and discovered it was a mistake. Because just like it was a mistake for us to kill off all the bison in the fields in the Midwest here, in the Plain States, that the elephants were really important to the health of the soil. What they were missing, anybody know what they were missing to keep the elephants from eating all the crops? Why did the elephants eat?
Fertilizer.
No, what were they
No,
missing?
they were missing what the elephants normally ate.
No, they weren't missing that. They killed off the lions first. So one of the things about, and I'll move on. One of the things that you need when you are having large groups of animals on fields is a way to move them. And when the soils of the prairie were first forming, we had large herds of bison and elk and deer and antelope and other ruminants. And they grazed areas, taking a bite here and a bite there. But because there were predators, the herds kept moving. They couldn't stay in one place for a very long time because, you know, if they moved into a particular area, there were bears and wolves and mountain lions that were after their own dinner. And so the herds didn't stay in one place. And so they grazed the areas enough for the plants to release their exudates that attract the soil biology that they need for regrowth, but they didn't overgraze areas because the predators kept them going. And if you live in an area where people have cattle that are on one field all the time, you'll see that the soil gets really bad because they eat every blade of that grass. So in order to have healthy soil, you need the animals, but you need them to keep moving. And holistic management also encourages using different types of animals. So you can graze. This is not necessarily typical, but I've seen this way of grazing. So if you have the cows on a piece of land for a few days and you move them off and you follow them up with sheep, whatever pests that the cows had are not things generally that attack the sheep. And if you follow those sheep with chickens, they'll eat the emerging larva of whatever pests the sheep have put out. So that actually keeps the pest in check in order that the animals aren't reinfected by their own. So you don't graze the animals on the same piece of ground until the area regrows and is back to its larger capacity like this. Unfortunately, these days we've taken the pigs and the chickens and put them in buildings. Not a lot of people raise sheep, but generally sheep do get raised outside. And the cows are in CAFOs, in confinement lots, and forced to eat things that they're not designed to eat. Cows are not supposed to be fed corn. They just don't do well on it, which is why they wind up having to have all the antibiotics and things that get into us. But the key piece to the holistic management is to divide the land up into paddocks, basically, and move the cattle on a regular basis. Some people will move them every couple of days, every day, several times a day, depending on how many animals you have on what ground, but to not bring them back to that area until it regrows, and to keep them moving in one big herd all the time. And there are definitely ways of doing this that make it fairly easy. One of the things that you might note is that if animals see taller grass in the area you're pointing them towards and where they're standing, they will go to that automatically. There's a variety of electric gates, and I've seen some really interesting smallholder paddocks for their sheep that keep them moving forward and grazing their land in a way that really makes the land more productive. So, and truthfully, up until probably post World War II, most small farms had a variety of animals on them. They had a few pigs, they had a few chickens, you know, not necessarily sheep are coming back, and definitely meat goats are coming back into favor. But they had a few livestock, and they were able to make that work. Questions about this?
Carol, I remember someplace that we were where you had brought your own buffalo meat. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about what that's like, or where it's grown, or I was fascinated, so.
So I have a friend who has a small herd. I think he's got 75 now. And he actually works at the university on the power plant, the university's power plant. And he plows his money back into buying more land for his buffalo and expanding the herd. And they're pretty interesting. He does harvest a couple of animals a year, and that money goes back also into buying more land for the remaining buffalo. And so he's trying to keep it going. And they're not as easy to manage with fences and gates, but they do keep themselves moving. So they don't like to stay in one place very long, and they move around. So we actually have quite a few places in the area that raise buffalo these days. Most of them have some cattle genes in them because when they were all out there together, they frolicked. But we do have some interesting bison herds, yeah. And I do buy meat from him because I try to keep my local farmers going.
Carol, I haven't read it myself, but I have heard from people disputing the whole idea of livestock enhancing soil. And have you heard those stories?
Mm-hmm.
And what is is there scientific consensus about that, or are there credible points to be made on all sides?
There isn't scientific consensus because no one studies this. And no one studies it because there's no money in it. So
it's also very hard to get scientific consensus on systems because scientists have to isolate variables.
Right. So yeah. The thing that we do know is that grass plants and forbs in fields like this respond to being bitten, and they respond to being bitten by sending a chemical message which involves carbon, sugar, into the ground to attract organisms that will bring them stuff that will help them regrow. And it's that putting the carbon into the soil there that is what they think is important about using the animals on it. The other thing is that, you know, farmers they get the fertilizer that they need right from the animal on the field that it's on. You know, I mean, there's not
Right.
having to cart the manure out of the corral and spread it, and certainly much better than the sludge ponds. If you ever if you ever have a chance to drive through Dallas, Texas, I highly recommend it. You'll never want to eat a CAFO-grown cow again. That's the thing that they know. The other thing that is true is that as hooved animals, this is not so much true for chickens, but hooved animals moving through the landscape crush the plants as well. And so that's another piece that adds to that organic matter in the soil that allows the soil biology to have something to eat. So basically you have livestock above that we all recognize, and then there's these millions of livestock below ground that we also need to feed, because they're the ones that bring the nourishments to the plants. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I really
The-
appreciate
the
it. It was Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma. I mean, I was never a
Right.
big, I would eat CAFO beef at In-N-Out once a year, but I swore off it after
Yeah.
Omnivore's Dilemma, and I heard the whole story.
Well, and truthfully, the small producer, and I agree that it's more expensive, but lately it's not all that much more expensive than what you get in the grocery store. Those people who are producing grass-fed, grass-finished beef are easier to find now. And my friends who sell me beef said their business, since the shutdown of everything, their business has really boomed, because people want that. The other piece to it is that there have been some studies done on the quality of the food. So like the amount of omega-3s in the grass-fed beef as opposed to the other. So they can actually prove that the meat is somewhat healthier. And of course, it hasn't had any antibiotics or anything like that.
Yeah, this area has, it's not big scale farming, but there's a huge amount of community supported and community sponsored
Right.
agriculture, and including various types of meat producers. And it's all happy animals.
Yes.
Carol, in
Go ahead.
my neighborhood, there must be 4 or 5 different grass-fed animals. I don't know the full degree of rotation that some of them are doing, and that I want to check in, but they've been doing a booming business since the shutdown.
Yes.
There's also that book, Cows Save the Planet.
Yes, there is. And there's also The Soil Will Save Us. That's another good one.
Yeah.
I think
I'd like to check
you
in
were
with
going to
you.
say something, Shelley. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to check in with Carol about timing. We have a couple of people who have their hands raised, but I'm wondering if you want to finish your talk and then take.
I've got a few more to go here, and
Why
yeah,
don't
if you give me
we
a
do
chance,
that?
then we can ask questions at the end.
Till Carol has a chance to finish, okay?
Okay. So good discussion though so far. So Gabe Brown asserts that these 5 principles can be adapted for any farm on the planet. What works in North Dakota might not work in North Carolina or here in Kansas, but although we're very similar, or Texas or Kenya. But adaptations to the kinds of crops and animals can be made so that the nutrient cycle, the water cycle, and the energy cycles work for that location. And so that's really important. You need to know that no place is too wet or too dry or too hot or too cold or too high or too low. And the size of the farm doesn't matter. And all of these can be adapted to the 5 principles. And this is the 6th principle, and I think it's really important, and that is to observe. And Gabe Brown is a very Christocentric farmer, which is great. And he quotes Job, and I like this quote: "But ask the animals, and they will teach you, or the birds in the sky, and they will tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, or let the fish in the sea inform you. Which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. And I think that's really important for us to remember, is that we need to observe. It is also the first principle of permaculture, is observe and interact. And we need to pay special attention to wherever it is that we're living, to see what that land needs. And so if you've got a yard or a garden or whatever, you pay attention to see what are the needs of that garden, what are the things that that need to be done for the health of that soil, for the health of that land. And the other thing that I'll say is that taking your soil to the extension agent to be tested will not necessarily tell you all the things that it needs, because the soil, the way they extract the nitrogen for testing doesn't really give you an accurate reading. You get a really good accurate reading of your organic matter, but a lot of times the nitrogen content is not what it seems. And then small farms. Now, David Montgomery, who is a geologist, I heard him speak not last year, but the year before at the Kansas Rural Center Conference. He's a geologist who got interested in soil biology when his wife tried to start a garden at their house in, I can't remember if they're in Washington or Oregon, but somewhere up there. And he writes and speaks frequently about restoring soil. But he says small farms produce more than twice as much food per acre as large farms. The World Bank and the FAO both have published documents talking about the efficiency, the efficacy of small farms when it comes to feeding people around the world. So the idea is that we tell the farmers of Kansas, and if you ever drive through, you'll see the signs that say, one Kansas farmer feeds 127 people or something like that, which probably isn't a good thing, because it would be better if one Kansas farmer fed 20 people and there were 5 times as many farmers in Kansas, right? So that we were populating the plains again and restoring the soils. But working on restoring soils globally is what's really important. And one of the things that we see right now is the locust plague that's hitting West Africa. And that's a prime example of a broken ecosystem where a pest has figured out where its meal is coming from, and people will really suffer from that. So the other thing that Gabe Brown talks about is that no matter the size of the farm, that it has not just a diversity of crops and cover crops and animals, but that it has a diversity of enterprises. For a farmer to be successful, they have to have different revenue streams. So he has somebody who comes and puts their beehives on his land, and then he gets the honey from them and sells it. He definitely has a real entrepreneurial spirit when it comes to all the different things. The meat that they sell, I believe, is Nourished by Nature. I think that's the name of their company. But the thing that we're really lacking right now is political will. And farmers, the traditional farmers, need to unlearn what they've been taught about farming since Dr. Haber and Dr. Bosch figured out how to make that nitrogen fertilizer, because they're stuck in the old things. And they resist changing. They really do. You know what they call a group of farmers in a church basement? A wine cellar. because they don't like to do anything that's different. But new farmers, younger farmers, and there has begun to be a lot of interest by young people in farming. Younger farmers who, like Gabe Brown, grew up in town. He was not a farm kid. He kind of fell in love with farming after he married his wife and started helping her dad farm. But they're not wedded to the old ways quite the same as the folks that have grown up there. And truthfully, they've come to rely on Farm Bureau and agronomists and all that. And if they're being told one thing constantly all the time by the experts, then it's really hard for them to break away from that. But when they start to try out some of the new ways and they see, and this is a cross section of cover crop, that you can see how deep those roots are in that soil. That is not true of that annual wheat that those combines are after there. Gabe Brown kind of laughingly suggests that farmers try out some of his techniques in a field that's far from the road where the neighbors can't see it. And then if it doesn't work, then nobody needs to know, right? But if it works, then they can do it in another place where people can see it and they'll be impressed, right? So, and the farmers of the regenerative agriculture movement need partners. And the partners that they need are the consumers who choose their products over conventionally raised crops and meat. And that's really important. So remember about this. Change the way you see things. So we've been stuck at the small changes level. Everybody takes they have their reusable straw and they take their bags to the grocery store, though we can't do that right now because we're not allowed to, right? And they recycle, even though our recycling plant is closed right now, I'm still stockpiling it. If I turned my computer a little bit, you'd see the mountain that's in my kitchen. We've made all those small changes and they're not enough. We know that. We've been stuck at that level for the last 50 years since Earth Day in 1970. But now we might have an opportunity to see things differently. So this is Los Angeles. This picture was taken about a week ago, maybe 10 days ago, after it's been shut down for a while. And you all were talking about the blue skies. That is a really different picture of Los Angeles than most of us are used to. Those are the Himalayas. First time in years that they've been seen from this town. And they've only been shut down about, have they been shut down 3 weeks or 4 weeks now? I can't remember which. And this is the Ganga River in India, which is just running beautifully crystal clear. We've been given this opportunity to see things differently. Daniel Christian Wall has wrote a query in his book, Designing Regenerative Cultures. Will we manage to co-create a life-sustaining and regenerative human civilization expressed in vibrant diversity of locally adapted and globally collaborative cultures? Even by dedicating our lives to the creation of regenerative cultures, we are not saving the planet or saving life on Earth. Earth will continue long after our species meets its almost inevitable extinction. But we don't have to actively accelerate our own demise. Can we make the major changes? And because I don't want to leave you on a downer, and because whenever I talk about Wes Jackson, I have to talk about his good friend Wendell Berry. And I will just leave this up here for you to read.